The Life of Jesus Christ in Chronological Order, Part 3. Now, I will say from the outset, as you know, if you've been watching the videos, I use KJV for purposes which I've described in other videos. I also have a playlist explaining KJV English, and I think you might find it enlightening if you're not familiar with it. But let's go ahead and begin. But I wanted to note this because there are some names in this genealogy from the Old Testament that the KJV, true to its literal style, transliterates from the Greek, and some of the names are unrecognizable, or they take a different form. I will be using their recognizable Old Testament pronunciation when we come to them. It says, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob. And Jacob begat Judas, that should be actually Judah in the Old Testament, but in Greek it's Judas, and his brethren. And Judah begat Perez and Zerah of Tamar. And Perez begot Esrom, and Esrom begat Aram, that's actually Ram. And Ram begot Amminadab, and Amminadab begot Nahshon, and Nahshon begot Salmon. And Salmon begat Boaz of Rahab, and Boaz begat Obed of Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David the king, and David the king begat Solomon of her that had been the wife of Uriah. That's actually Bathsheba, we know from the story back in 2 Samuel 11. And Solomon begat Rehoboam, and Rehoboam begat Abijah, and Abijah begat Asa, and Asa begat Jehoshaphat. And Jehoshaphat begat Joram, and Joram begat Ozias, that's Uzziah. And Uzziah begat Jotham, and Jotham begat Ahaz, and Ahaz begat Ezekias, it's actually Hezekiah. And Hezekiah begat Manasseh, and Manasseh begat Ammon, and Ammon begat Josias, that's actually Josiah. And Josiah begat Jeconias, that's actually Jehoahaz or Jehoiakim, and his brethren, about the time that they were carried away to Babylon. And after they were brought to Babylon, Jeconias, or Jehoiachin, begat Salathiel, and Salathiel begat Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel begat Abihud, and Abihud begat Eliakim, and Eliakim begat Azor, and Azor begat Zadok, and Zadok begat Achim, and Achim begat Eliud. And Eliud begat Eleazar, and Eleazar begat Mathan, and Mathan begat Jacob, and Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations, and from David until the carrying away into Babylon are 14 generations, and from the carrying away into Babylon unto Christ are 14 generations. Now, there is plenty that can be said about this genealogy. The first thing is that Matthew wants to point out that Jesus is the descendant of Abraham. Abraham is the one to whom the promises were originally made. Jesus is the seed that would bless the earth. That was the whole purpose of Abraham's calling, is to be the progenitor of the Messiah. He says, all nations will be blessed through your seed. That seed is Jesus. Many people think that all nations were blessed through Israel. No, that's not the case. It is Jesus Christ. That was the whole purpose of Israel's existence, all the purpose of all the prophetic utterances, all the purpose of the sanctuary service and all its types and symbols. And then we go on down here. It mentions Judah. Judah is the one that kind of saved the day with Joseph in Egypt, if you remember that story from the later chapters in Genesis. And continuing on, it mentions the twins that were born from Judah. That's an incredible story, actually. In Genesis 38, he had his daughter-in-law Tamar. She had two husbands that were sons of Judah that died beforehand. They were very evil men, and she was promised the third son, but I think Judah maybe thought she was bad luck, and so she actually, through a series of events, has a child with Judah. Sounds pretty gross, actually, the daughter-in-law, but she realized there was something special about that family, and because of her diligence, she became an ancestor of the Messiah. And you might say, oh, that's gross, that's terrible. Why would that be in the Bible? Well, the Bible does not sugarcoat life experiences, and actually the heroes of the faith. Their lives are not polished up like they are in other religions. They were imperfect people in imperfect situations. And guess what? You are also the product of imperfect people in imperfect situations. There are some terrible things that happen on this earth, and we exist because of it. It's not that God willed for those terrible things to happen, but he used those terrible things to bring about something beautiful. And in this case, it's the Messiah. But we're not done yet. As we go on, we see the story of Boaz, and Boaz was born of Rahab. Look at this. Salmon begat Boaz of Rahab. Rahab was a harlot. She was a whore, a hooker, you would say in today's terminology. She lived in Jericho, but she had faith in the God of Israel, and she told the spies and hid them. She hid them in her house and protected them as they were spying out Jericho, and they made a deal, and her household were spared. And because of her faith, not only was her life spared, she apparently married this guy Salmon, not the fish, but she married him, and as a result, she became an ancestor of Jesus Christ biologically. So that's pretty amazing. And then, she also becomes the great-grandmother of David, or the great-great-grandmother. And then we see the story about David and Bathsheba. It's kind of hidden here, maybe to protect David's honor. I don't know. It's written. The story's in the Old Testament, the story about David and Bathsheba. A terrible series of events. There were lies, there was drunkenness, there was outright murder of a friend. He even had his friend deliver his own death warrant. There was all kinds of terrible things associated with this relationship that David got himself into. He was lusting for one thing. He was also not going to war as kings were expected to. He stayed back and he lusted after a woman and slept with her. She got pregnant, and then he actually tried to get her husband drunk, which was one of his military leaders, Uriah the Hittite, and get him to go sleep with his wife. But he said he couldn't do that because the men were at war and he wanted to get back on the battlefield. And so David had a problem. He had a pregnant woman, which was the wife of one of his military commanders, and he hadn't slept with her, so she would be stoned for committing adultery, but it was with the king, so he was in a situation. So he made sure Uriah got killed. And then he took Bathsheba into his own house. And you'd say, that's a terrible story. Why did David get away with that? I'm going to tell you, I don't have all the answers, but all I know is that God used that ugly situation and brought about two people, one of them Nathan, who's Mary's ancestor, and then also Solomon, who is David's ancestor. And we'll get into the differences between the genealogies at another time. But Solomon was born of Bathsheba. That was his mama. And as we continue on, we also notice that there are several generations that are skipped. There's several kings that are not mentioned. And there's different speculation as to why that is, but I have it written here. It skips Ahaziah, Joash, and Amaziah. Now, it may be because they were descendants of Jezebel's daughter, Athaliah, and there was a 4-generation curse that went on at that time, so maybe they're not mentioned for that reason. We aren't really told, but it continues on to talks about Jehoiachim and Jehoiakim. That's the brethren of Josias. He had several sons, and they were all kings of Israel in the last days. The final one was Zedekiah. He wasn't really in the messianic lineage, but they were carried away to Babylon. And then we have a list of people. The last one that's mentioned in the Bible is Zerubbabel. You find him in the book of Zechariah and also in Ezra, I believe. But Zerubbabel is the last person mentioned in the Old Testament. So from after Zerubbabel, this guy Abihud, we don't know anything about him, and it continues on and tells us about these people that we've lost the records. There's different speculation as to why we don't have access to those records. We do know that Herod the king, Herod the Great, that killed all the babies when he heard about the new king, Jesus, being born, that he burned a lot of the temple records. So a lot of the genealogical data was destroyed at that time. But here we have something also very interesting I want to close on. Joseph's father was named Jacob. Joseph is you could say, the non-biological father of Jesus. But it's interesting because his father's name was Jacob. And in the Old Testament, you have Jacob, who is renamed Israel, and he had a son named Joseph. Joseph was the savior of his brethren. Remember, there was a famine in the land in Egypt. It's a beautiful story in the chapters 37 on through the rest of Genesis, on through chapter 50. You hear the story of how Joseph was the savior of his family. And so he's the son of Jacob. And here you've got a new Jacob and Joseph pair. And Joseph ends up being the father of Jesus, who is the savior of humanity. And there's different speculations on this. I don't really want to get into it, but Matthew divides it up into 3 sets of 14. He says from Abraham to David are 14 generations, David unto the carrying away of Babylon are 14, and from Babylon unto Christ were 14. Why he felt the need to do that? 3 14s equals 42, which is a multiple of 7. It's 6 sevens. 6 7. Anyway, if you don't get that, don't worry about it. But anyway, yeah, Matthew felt the need to do that. There's some numerology going on here that I don't quite understand. I've read different explanations of it, and I'm not sure. But the main purpose of this is to show that Jesus Christ was of Abraham. Not only is he the Son of God, he is also called the Son of David from the outset. And the Messiah was said to be of David's lineage. And we have that going back in Samuel, and it's mentioned in the prophets like Hosea and Ezekiel, Jeremiah, that the Messiah would be the son of David, because David was not really the first, but he was the first main king of the united Israel in the Old Testament, and Jesus Christ would inherit that throne. But we're going to find out that this line was actually cursed. This was a cursed lineage. We'll find that out in the book of Jeremiah, but Luke has another genealogy, and it is of Mary, and that lineage is not cursed, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We will stop right there on the third part of the life of Jesus Christ in chronological order.